Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, 'cause it's root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame, 'cause it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Welcome to Let's Get To, the baseball podcast from the fans' perspective. Now here's your host, James Christopher.
And welcome back, y'all, to another episode of Let's Get To. I am your host, James Christopher. We've got a fun episode for you today. We're going to be visiting with Emily Nyman from Breaking Balls Pod. Andy's here, Scott is here, and Darien Sills-Evans is here to give the lifelong Met perspective to the passing of Tom Seaver. But today is a very big day for me. One of probably the biggest anniversaries in my life. Today is the 21st anniversary of the night I met my wife. And, you know, you guys who watch the show, who listen to the show, know that she's a regular fixture on the show. And that isn't by mistake. There's nothing that I love doing that I don't love doing just a little bit more if she's doing it with me. And yes, some of my more crass friends will throw an inappropriate joke in there. And yes, that too. We met, again, 21 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And as I get older, there are certain details of our life together that maybe I don't remember as much as I should. But the night I met her is so vivid in my mind. So I was still in the Army, stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I was an E5 at the time, I think, a sergeant. And been back from Bosnia, was going through a rough time, wanted to go visit my brother. And he was a student at UT in Austin and was like, yeah, come down. It'd be good to hang out with you. However, don't hook up with any of my friends. He didn't want me to come down and do the soldier boy thing and then leave all of his friends upset if I, broke some hearts and didn't call anyone. I think he thought a lot more about my prowess with women than maybe I did at the time. But no, I was excited to see him. It had been a really long time and we were down hanging out, and I'll never forget, and this is going to be a little crass, but we were hanging out and he had introduced me to some of his really good friends. He wanted me to get to know them. We were hanging out on the patio of his apartment before we all went out. And there was this guy that drove by, and he had like a small little S10 pickup truck, but it had glass packs on it. So it sounded like all big and muscle trucky. And he drove by and it went, whoa, real thing. And like, again, at that point, I had been to a war zone, and so little expressions of masculinity like that just didn't impress me. And I remember making a joke that his penis had to just been huge to have a truck that badass, but of course all sarcastic. And I remember her laugh. And I remember that becoming the goal for me for the rest of the night, was to make sure that laugh happened again. Now, it did happen again because it turns out the guy with the glass packs on his truck was my brother's other roommate, and that was a little awkward. But the laugh is what grabbed me first. And I did my best to kind of be as near her as I could through the night. We went to several parties. There were several groups of people, but I made a point of gravitating to where Jessica was. And we were, we were young and we were all just drinking too much. And I met Jeff Hahn that night. It was his birthday, but it was at the end of the night. And I'm not going to lie, some other ladies were all about it. But again, I wanted to be near her. And it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was looking for my keys, and she was helping me look for my keys. And we were in my brother's apartment in the center kitchen area. There was an island there, and everybody in the apartment was passed out. And I kissed her, and that was the beginning of it for me. And that was 21 years ago today, and it's been my best friend. The all the cliches. But baseball has always been real important to our lives, which is why I'm bringing it up in a baseball show, because I've been putting together some retrospectives of this, because our wedding anniversary, our 20th, is actually, we got married a year later. She proposed to me, funny story, but a year later we were married. And so I've been putting together some stuff to kind of commemorate that. When we did get together, she wasn't used to the idea that she would have a husband or a boyfriend or a husband that would be gone for months at a time. And so I made her a book. And when it got to 30 days, you turn the page, and it was a countdown calendar with photos of me and of her. And the idea is that it would make the last month go by a little quicker. Well, when I found this thing, I was putting this together, I discovered that she kept, for those of you listening to the podcast, this is the May 2000 Astros catalog from our first Astros game together. Scotty from Before the Pitch will love the fact that it is in the uniform and look that I hate. But yeah, it was still called Enron Field at the time. And it was our first Astros game together right before we went on our first beach trip together in Galveston. And yeah, she kept the whole program, which is kind of cool. And then she also has our first missions game program. So she's a San Antonio girl and grew up going to missions games, which, as I've said before, is a really big part of how this show grew in the first place, is where I learned about minor league baseball. But it's actually a really cool cover because it was their 100th anniversary for the missions. So, again, 21 years ago today, 20 years ago in about a week, and baseball's been a part of our life this whole time. So, Jessica, I love you so much. Happy anniversary. And I can't wait for our winery trip this weekend. And eventually, hopefully in December, we'll be in Cancun when hopefully this COVID thing dies down. But that's the schmaltzy part of the episode, or maybe not. Like I said, we've got a lot of baseball love coming your way. So stay with us.
And now to the Dugout, featuring Darien Sills-Evans.
So we're excited to go back into the Dugout with Darien Sills-Evans, and it's 3 weeks in a row. That's like a streak in baseball.
Yeah,
there you go. Right. But we brought you on because it's a sad day in Met world. Tom Seaver passed away, and I thought, what better to put some perspective on what it means to that fan community, what he means to that group.
I mean, the Mets don't have a lot of retired players who have their numbers retired. There's Tom Seaver and there's Mike Piazza, and Tom Seaver is the face of the Mets. He has been since the franchise began, and that also, and I think the best thing about that is, he always carried the Mets with him. He went into the Hall of Fame as a Met, and which was the first one to do that. And, my first game ever at Shea Stadium with my grandparents, Tom Seaver was pitching and he lost. But I was still a Tom fan, only because my grandmother loved him so much. And she was devastated when he went to Cincinnati, But he came back in '83, and he was not quite the same, but he was still Tom, and he won games, and I don't know. He was just, Tom Seaver was just comfort food, I think, for Mets fans. And I heard from my father-in-law, I guess last year, maybe a year and a half ago, that he was pretty ill. And I don't remember how my father-in-law knew, but he was the one that first told me that Tom Seaver was not doing very well. And, so I think, a lot of Mets fans kind of knew this day was coming, was certainly imminent. 2020 has been horrible on so many fronts. And, I think the loss of our heroes and is just one of them.
One of the things that struck me, so I was prepping for this, Scott wanted me to read does a show with you, wanted me to read these stats to you just to put it in perspective. 1967, his rookie year, he went 16-13. He had a 2.76 ERA, but he pitched 251 innings that year as a rookie. I mean, that's unheard of.
How many complete games in that year?
It must have been like all of them. I don't know.
Right,
A lot.
right.
Yeah. And that was the year where the Mets only won 61 games total. So he basically won half their games. One of the things that really struck me, because, he is one of those members of baseball royalty that we will talk about forever. But I was watching the Astros post game, and apparently Dusty Baker has the third most ABs against him and was pretty successful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like I think he hit over 300 against Tom Seaver. Well, the Astros beat writer Chandler Rome goes, what do you think about Tom's passing? And he hadn't heard. So we saw in that Zoom call just that gut punch of finding out that he had passed away.
Oh, no. I got to look at that. It's rough, man. I'm sure for Dusty Baker, the era that he played in, it's the older we get, the more precious it is, because we see our friends go. We see the people we competed against kind of diminish. And, it's life is unfair in that regard. But
I do have to wonder what it's like. I mean, there's two angles to that, right? There is the Dusty Baker era of, he's also in his 70s. He's, but also you're right. Like you and I are starting to kind of lose our heroes. And one of the things that, of course, went wide on Houston Twitter was a photo of he and Nolan Ryan at a reunion. Well, there's another one that's
please don't say Nolan Ryan to a Mets fan, please. That's
yeah, it's a very different reality, huh?
Yeah. There's an alternate universe where the Mets win like 15 World Series in a row with Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan.
Probably all beating a certain team from Houston in the NLCS.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest. Yeah, I thought of you immediately when the news came across, because I didn't remember the story of you getting to see him pitch. And, he's one of those guys I'm assuming that, we'll keep talking about for as long as we're talking about baseball.
I think so. I mean, certainly I will as a Mets fan. We don't have many people in the Hall of Fame who merit kind of discussions as one of the greats in the game at their position. Mets fans tend to get great players long after their prime, and Willie Mays comes to mind. But Tom Seaver was someone that was kind of homegrown to the Mets and became a star and really kind of led the team. And even after he stopped playing, he was always around. If you're from New York, you're very familiar with Tom Seaver being in the booth for games and, either actually calling games or doing color on them. And when he stopped doing that, he would just drop in either on TV or on the radio. He was always around. And so you never really missed him, because he was still such a part of the Mets. But yeah, now it's things change.
I guess as we wrap up then, I was thinking about that era of pitcher, and I mean, we're probably done seeing someone like that era of pitchers quickly leaving, where with pitch counts and things like that, you're not going to see somebody that's going to throw 251 innings in a rookie season anymore.
No, not at all. How many games did he win?
I think he went 16 and 13, because we all know that the 16 and 13
total career.
Oh, I don't have that. No, Scott just really wanted me to throw those rookie year numbers at you for some reason.
You will never see those numbers from pitchers again. That kind of stuff is in the past. I mean, those guys were throwing, like you said, if they had 30 starts, they were probably throwing 20 complete games.
Really?
And now, Ballpark and Chill, the best in binge-worthy baseball.
So we're excited to welcome to Ballpark and Chill, our new segment on Let's Get To, where we promote other podcasts that we think, are doing a good job promoting the sport of baseball. And we're excited to have Emily Nyman, one of the hosts from Break Balls Pod. Emily, how's it going?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. So first of all, you staying safe in this weird 2020 madness?
Yeah, just, I'm fortunate that I work in a small office with not that many people, and I was able to work from home for a long time, so I can't complain. Everyone's healthy so far, so.
Yeah. No, it's been nuts. It's been a weird baseball season. I know that you're a Yankee fan or primarily Yankee, and you guys had the whole no games for COVID when it wasn't your team. And I'm an Astros fan. We had that too, and that sucks.
Yeah, it was, I tried to look at the bright side and just say, hey, for a while, I was 100% convinced that we weren't going to see any baseball. And then when the season came back, I was like, this isn't going to last more than a week, 2 weeks tops. So when teams go down or they have game postponed, I'm like, you know what? Let me just try to look on the bright side of life.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to look at it. So I want to talk about your show. And the first thing that what I love about your show is actually not the content of the show itself, though. I love that it was something I think it was your co-host said about you. And it's a long way around a short question, but I'm an independent film business. And the thing about independent film is these days, anyone can make a film. Right. Just like these days, anyone can have a podcast. But your co-host, I think it was, talked about the work you put into it, the pre-show prep, the post-production. You really put a lot of time in it, what not a lot of people do. Why do you think it's important to make a product that has good production value?
I think pretty much because when it comes down to it, people can have a great conversation and it could have good content. But unless you're a seasoned pro, people who have been doing podcasting for years, what ends up being recorded, no one wants to listen to that. And I've listened to many amateur podcasts and they're tough. Even if the personalities are great, even if the content is great, it's really, really difficult to get through because the pauses, the mistakes, the, losing your train of thought, all these things that happen when you're trying to record that you don't anticipate happening. All of a sudden, I would find myself during the lockdown, I would listen to a lot of other podcasts just to see what else was out there. And I would be working at the same time. And then all of a sudden I would come to and be like, wait, did this podcast shut off? And it would just be, no, it would be like a minute long pause with no one saying anything and no sound. So that's tough to listen to. And it's tough to keep people engaged.
Just get a cheap editing software and cut that out. I mean, that's a big part of it. So what did prompt you to kind of start your own?
I had been talking about baseball for a long time. And recently in the past, year or so, I'd really grown a lot of engagement and impressions on Twitter. And I realized that, hey, people like my takes and think I'm as funny as I think I'm funny. So my fiance was like, hey, why don't you should do a podcast. You should. And I was like, no, I was feeling embarrassed. Like, what if no one listens to it? And he really pushed me. And I'm glad he did, because now it's like the best thing that I've ever done. I'm having such a great time.
Is it fun doing it with your spouse or being involved?
Oh yeah, it's fantastic because he's who edits. He's the one who produces and engineers the entire show. So it's really nice. He and I, we spend basically the past 7 years, we've been attached at the hip, but it's just been really fun to work in this capacity together and just to see him and in his zone, this is like his world. So it's really nice to have his guidance and his tough love at times. It's nice.
My wife, we're hitting our 20-year anniversary, I think, in like a week and a half. I'm editing this film. Oh, I shouldn't say that. She watches the show. Now she'll know what her surprise is. Nothing happening. But she loves baseball too. So being able to do that with her is such an important part of our life as well. One of the things I love about you on Twitter is you're one of the rare, reasonable baseball Twitter fans. What is it about Twitter that makes us all want to put on our chief ignorant a-hole hat and go out into the world? I don't understand it.
I think it's everyone, if you don't mind the term, everyone's got balls behind a keyboard, and especially behind an anonymous picture. And I think people, and I don't mean to sound condescending in this when I say this at all, baseball is a really difficult sport to understand. And even I don't understand it to its fullest extent, because something that I was always taught and that I always sort of put out there is that we're all students of the game. So a lot of people don't feel that way. They just watch it at face value and they don't want to hear anything else. They want to have the same instant gratification that you have in sports where there's a clock and
Yeah.
Possession can change on a dime. So the offense can really drive the ball down the field or whatever. That doesn't happen here. It's a slow burn, and that frustrates people, and they get frustrated by getting mad at the sport and at the players for not playing the game in the way that it's not meant to be played and can't be played, really.
Yeah, I think we had an interaction on Twitter about that when, because I grew up pretty much in the Astrodome, and the Astros have always been mildly popular, but after really 15, it increased, and now there's a bunch of people who didn't know baseball who are like, well, you lost 3 in a row, fire everyone. Yeah. They're going to lose 60 games this year. It's either going to come at one time or whatever, and I think that's a big part of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's always such a strange thing to me that, it's a sport, and obviously barring pitching, but the meat of the sport, everyone likes offense, right? They don't really care as much about defense. So they fail far more than they succeed. So it's I just tweeted this the other day, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Of all the sports that you can choose to follow, there's so many pro sports. To follow baseball, if you need 100%, perfection, it's really a strange thing. Like, you just want to be really frustrated in your free time. I don't get it. Like, these guys are going to fail. They're going to strike out a lot. They're going to ground out a lot. Like, this isn't the sport for you if that pisses you off.
When I bring fans on from other MLB clubs, it's always hilarious to me, outside of Yankee fans, because of the success that your club has had. Everyone's favorite memory is pain. And I think that's just hilarious to me. My really good buddy's a Mets fan, and he will bring up pain. Maybe he just doesn't bring up 86 to save me the emotional trauma. But it's what it is, right? It's pain.
It is. Baseball is pain. I mean, I'm certainly a masochist. I mean, my favorite player of all time is Alex Rodriguez. So it's just the sport. And then I chose like the worst guy that everyone hates besides me and like his mom. So it's love is pain, though, I guess, in this instance.
I mentioned I was an Astros fan, right? I'm really living that reality right this second. And I've become known as the reasonable Astros fan. So people will bring me on going, hey, can you explain? I'll try again, but here's just bookmark the show and I'll go over why all that matters. So what can we look forward to from you on your show for the rest of the season?
People can look forward to just, not to sound cheesy or generic, but like really honest takes. I put myself 100% into it, that I'm unapologetically me, and that's for better or for worse. But it's just something that has always been such a strong center of my personality throughout life, that this is no different. So what you see on Twitter is exactly what you would get on my podcast, and is exactly what you would get if we were to just be hanging out as friends. That I like to think I have a pretty unique perspective. I played the game for a really long time. I've been around it my entire life. So and it's fun. My show is a lot of fun. It's funny. Our takes are funny. Yeah, it's a great show. I think it's awesome. I listen to it each episode a few times each week, just because it's a lot of fun. People would like, if you guys listen to it, you'll really enjoy it. Trust me.
All right. So before we get to the generic where to find you question, there's a tendency, I think, when we go to again, ignorant sports fans, there's a tendency right now for Astros fans to sort of be dancing on the struggles Garrett Cole is having right now. As a Yankee fan, forgetting the fact that Garrett Cole struggled in April and May every single year that he was with Houston, and this is really April and May still. Where are you feeling as far as how Garrett and whether the contract was worth it from the Yankee perspective?
I mean, I absolutely think the contract was worth it. I think that because that's the take I had on December 12th or whatever it was when that news broke, and to have that sort of belief shaken over 8 starts when his contract is like a decade long is insane to me. Plus the fact that, I'm not to go down this road, but there's a lot of the contracts, they've already earned a large portion of their contract. They don't get a contract like that without performing to a certain extent leading up to free agency. So he's already earned that money, so to speak. As far as moving forward, I think that, as an Astros fan, that Cole is a workhorse and he's never settled. He's a perfectionist. And you can tell I've never been one for post-game interviews. I've always felt that they were a little canned. It was never something that I looked forward to or really put much stock in. But from what I've seen from him, and people have been making fun of him, but he takes this very seriously, and he was getting upset in his post game and talking candidly about what he thinks he needs to change and what he thinks went wrong, which is something that I've never really heard, that, maybe I'm tipping pitches. And I really appreciated that it was all about what he did or what maybe he didn't do. It wasn't the umpire. It wasn't, the catcher. It wasn't all these outside factors that are convenient to say when things don't go right. It was him and inward focus. And I think that a player like that there's no reason to believe that he's not going to evolve and just be the player that we want him to be. And it's a 60-game season, so it's a slow burn. Like we mentioned, this season's kind of a wash. It's like it's September, but it's actually like April, so I'm not going to get on him too much.
I got a shirt from the Salem Red Sox. I'm a big minor league baseball is a big focus of our show, and it says longest spring training ever, which I think suits it up. But that's exactly the reason why that answers why people need to be tuning into your show. Tell everybody real quick, Emily, where they can find you.
The show is Breaking Balls with Emily Nyman. We can be found on any major platform if you just search that, or you can find us on Twitter at BreakBallsPod, and you can find me on Twitter at MSheDoesIt. That's EMSHEDOESIT. Almost forgot the spelling there myself. It's pretty long. We'll get you a hot link. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on Let's Get To, and I know you got some show prep to get to, so we can't wait to hear it. Thank you so much, James. This was awesome. Thanks.
And now, the Big League Chew, an eye on the majors. Brought to you by Zoomer Sport.
So we are back on the Big League Chew with Scott McEntire, and I want everybody to know that when you and I were talking last night, what we talk about, we could talk about hits by pitch, we could talk about the MILB getting shot in the face, but we thought, you know what, let's actually have some fun, positive baseball talk.
Yeah, whose album was it? Never mind the bollocks. I think that's really where we kind of got. Come on, let's have some fun here, right? Let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff for a change, because we're 60% into the baseball season, right, Jim?
Yeah,
it's baseball. It's baseball. Thank you. It's Major League Baseball that everybody's getting to watch. All the collegiate leagues are down. Nobody's getting to go out. You're not getting to make any more trips here for a while. Although I hear Joliet was a blast.
Yes,
but now you either have the option to get up at 4:30, like I do, and watch the KBO, which is still a blast, or you can watch Major League Baseball that is played all day long. So I kind of got a blend between the two. When what is his name? Kyung Kim, the newest pitcher for the Cards, last at KK is what everybody calls him. Yeah, I got to watch him pitch the other night, throwing 91-mile-an-hour heaters at the top of the zone with 65-mile-an-hour curveballs. Yeah. He is the left-handed version of Adam Wainwright, and it was a blast to watch.
Yeah, the Astros have Brooks Raley, who for 5 years was a KBO guy, and now he's come on and pitched really, really well. But there has been some good stuff. We had a no-hitter not long ago. Like, what have been some of the things that have really kind of made you really glad this is a game that you looked forward to being back?
I love the fact of how well Charlie Blackmon is hitting the ball in Colorado, albeit even though that it's Colorado, he's tearing the cover off the ball.
Yeah.
I love Blackmon. There's something about that Duck Dynasty beard that he has.
I just imagine that he literally lives in the Rockies and comes down to play. Like, he's trapping.
I think you're right. Have you ever? I don't expect to see guys with beards that long to move that quickly. That's what I don't. I expect them to be big lumbering guys. Almost like, hey, how y'all doing? But no, Blackmon's he looks like a 33 RPM record that's to be played at 78. For those of you that are younger, vinyl records are things that we used to use because we old people didn't have even cassette tapes at the time.
Tapes at the time, yeah.
I'm trying to help out there, trying to educate the youth, the Utes of America. But no, I love the fact of how Blackmon is hitting the ball. I know you're going to hate for me to hear this, but the old Cardinals pitcher, Lance Lynn, I love the way Lance Lynn's been throwing the ball in Arlington. Yeah. Excuse me, I forget where I'm at. See what I did? I said Arlington. Yeah. But I love the way that I've seen Lance Lynn throw the ball there. I also enjoy the fact, we've talked about this a little bit, of how many of the young guys have been called upon, have been forced to come up and are doing something. Now, if a young Cardinal outfielder or two actually wants to hit the baseball and bat over 100 or bat over .50 or 050 with runners on base, that would be a blessing.
Positive, Scott. We're staying positive.
I'm saying if they want to. I'm trying to give them positive vibes. Hit the freaking baseball. That's all I'm saying. Just hit the ball. Not even talking about Dexter Fowler on the injured list. But anyway, I like to see how many of the young guys have been called upon and have delivered. I also love the fact, man, I didn't think I would say this, but I do. And I think we're going to continue to see 8 postseason teams in the future. I don't think that's something that's going away.
Really?
I don't think
okay.
I don't. I think because it's generating too much heat right now. You've got a team like Toronto. Any other year, Jim, Toronto is probably going to mail it in, right? If there's only 5 teams that are going to the postseason out of each division, Toronto's not a buyer at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
But by goodness, they were this year. They went out and they pick up Taijuan Walker. They're looking to get immediate help. They're slotted, I think, a couple of games in front of Detroit, of all teams, for that 8th spot.
Detroit's back today. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is it. I think it kind of, it almost feels like maybe until there is a salary cap in place, that maybe having 8 teams coming out of each side to the postseason is going to force some teams to spend a little more earlier than they were expecting to, and potentially get that competitive edge. Because let's face it, if you got 8 teams going into the postseason, and this is something we do in American sports that most places around the world do not do. We play long marathon seasons to get to this tiny little postseason. Say, okay, well, let's see how good you are at the end. Whereas you look at the Premiership or any other football league around the world, and they are they're playing the whole year. There's not a postseason in the Premiership. Whoever finishes at the top of the table wins the thing. We don't do that in the States.
Sure.
We want that charge at the end. This generates more heat for more teams being able to get that charge at the end.
And I think especially when contraction does happen, you were going to get to 8 anyway. Maybe you just get to 8 now. And it has been fun because, the Astros and the Yankees are going to the playoffs as wild cards. And I think that's where you got to pat yourself on the back, because you said at the beginning of this, the 2 teams that benefit from this short season would be Oakland and Tampa Bay. And so far you've been right.
Well. Yeah, Tampa, I believed it completely. I think also threw Milwaukee in, and I look really bad. But I appreciate you not bringing that up. But I'm probably gonna have to call myself out on that one. Yeah. Although that was a lot of belief in Craig Counsell rather than the roster. No, I also
think really believe in Anaheim, and I'm not bringing that up either.
Yeah. I'll tell you. Here's something too that really. Apparently, Anaheim believes in Anaheim too. See how I went to the positive way of saying this? Anaheim believes in Anaheim too, because the Mariners were absolutely selling at the deadline. And I do want to talk about that in a second, because I think there's a positive spin for what Seattle was doing.
Sure.
But Anaheim must believe in themselves, because they weren't sellers at the deadline. They have every reason in the world to sell and rebuild and go for things. And maybe the Ohtani experiment isn't so much, but I think they believe in the guys they've got, and just said, hey, we weren't ready for the short season. I don't know. I don't know why, but I thought they would sell. Didn't you?
No, I did, until I realized, like, the people you sell, you couldn't afford to sell. And so, to me, it doesn't seem like you don't sign Rendon. You don't put the money you put into Trout. I think they try to reload with some arms in the offseason. And I think, and I do think eventually they will put that thing together. I do want to touch on 2 teams, one being Seattle. But before we get to Seattle, talking about positivity, how much fun was it watching Padre fan when they just pushed their chips into the table? And I don't know. I know a few of them. I thought it was so much fun watching them be excited.
I thought I was watching the sequel to the movie Balls Out, because they were like, here we go. LA, I don't care that Walker Buehler's been on the IL. Don't care. We're in. We're all in. We don't care. We're all in. Because again, what's going to happen with 8 teams in the postseason? It's going to be a mad dash to the finish. And San Diego was like, we got lightning in a bottle. Let's go for it. Let's be honest. They're generating more heat than any other team in the major leagues. Now, a lot of that has to do because they got a really cool looking shortstop who's young and very athletic, cool blonde dreads, whatever.
Good glove, good bat. Slam Diego is the best nickname for a baseball team in forever. I mean,
and he hit a grand slam on a 3-0 count. And you know what that did? It generated heat. And there's no such thing as bad press unless you're Mike Clevenger, who, by the way,
you also called that, didn't you?
Where did he go?
He did go to San Diego, and it was
San Diego.
I've kind of adopted them as a team of I'm really invested in, and I was a little bummed, but we'll see.
I here's the thing: if Clevenger can get out there, walk into the clubhouse, and have a Jimmy Swaggart, "Forgive me, Lord, I have sinned," moment in the clubhouse, then okay, he's won over, and they're like, yeah, all right, well, we had a kid over here who made a mistake by hitting a 3-0 grand slam because somebody grooved up a pitch. So we'll give you a pass too for going out in Chicago on a Saturday night. I also think it's really good for if Clevenger is ever going to heal in this game, and a smart move by the Indians to trade him to the National League and trade him out west. They will see them maybe Clevenger may never, ever, ever face the Indians unless it's a postseason game and there's no other choice. Otherwise, it'll be a mid-year 2-game series that they can probably work him around.
And he gets to go face the Oakland A's at least once, so this guy is all about it. All of a sudden, on Mr. Sunshine. They can take.
But you were talking about,
but I want to talk about Seattle as we wrap up. Yeah.
So I think that there's a story behind all the selling. So Seattle wasn't really selling. If you look at it, they were getting rid of some of their good players. I'll take that back. Not 3 or 4 guys that they picked up, France, Tyler, something. I cannot remember the names. I'm totally having a blank out moment here. I was thinking a total moment from a guy that's been working 60 and 70 hours for the last couple of weeks of the day job and kind of, 5th cup of coffee today. That's why I'm like this. But I think there you go. I think they were buying because what they've done in the past, they had the guys that they brought in are guys that they had in for pre-draft workouts that they were just madly in love with. And in the case of Kelenic, he was a guy that went before they picked at 14, but they really, really loved him. Scott Service, the manager, actually had told a writer Service just looked giddy. And the guy's like, "Hey, why are you in such a good mood?" He said, "I've seen the best pre-draft workout I've ever seen in my entire career."
Oh, wow.
And then the guy went before 14th, but they were able to pick him up through trades. Now they've done the exact same thing with trades this year as well. So what Seattle has done is looked at guys before they were drafted and absolutely fallen in love with them and go, I can't have that girl right now. But, other relationships don't work out. You find yourself on the market. Her boyfriend's kind of weak. Let me see if I can talk her boyfriend into taking my trash to pick up his girlfriend. And that's exactly what they've done. Well, right. You get to have 60 girlfriends. Let's be honest right now. That's really the thing, Jim. You get 60 between the major league roster and the minor league. So the full active are 60. And then there's free agents out there. Right. It's like 2:00 at the bar whenever you got to pick up those free agents.
Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
So we are back here with Go Astros with Andy Tom Chesson. I don't know what to talk about, Andy. Should we talk about the Astros doing their best Pele impression against the Rangers the other night, or Christian Javier, or no trade deadline moves?
The trade deadline's easy for me. I don't think you saw any of the other teams who expect to make a playoff run, with the exception of the San Diego Padres, who honestly were the exception to everything that was expected, make any moves. The Yankees didn't make any moves. The Rays didn't make any moves. The Indians didn't make any major moves. The A's really didn't make any major moves. They made a minor move. So it's standing pat. And I think you look at getting Urquidy back, you get Bregman back, you're getting Brad Peacock back to bolster your bullpen, hopefully. And I guess, Devo as well. But 3 out of 4.
If I hear people get excited about the Devo strut again, I'm just going to be so irritated.
I would love to see it, and it had some meaning behind it.
Had some meaning about it.
But right now it's just, are you part rooster? Because I don't know why you'd be strutting otherwise, Mr. 5 ERA.
I don't know either. Do you feel like there's still, it's interesting because you're exactly right. Like the Yankees and Astros are right where we thought they'd be in playoff position for a wild card. Like it's such a weird year, but do you think teams care?
No. Rob Manfred told they're not wild cards this year. Only the 7 and 8 spots are wild cards. These are just second place division finishes.
Oh, so we get a banner that has a really long second place division winners in 2020 because it was weird. That was
playoff participant is what we will get.
I was going to say. How much does it matter though? Because the best kept or the worst kept secret is that it will be in a bubble.
Yep.
Seems like outside of knowing the park, what's the advantage?
I don't know that there is much of one other than just the pure who gets last at bats, because that is an advantage. That's why the home team gets it. It's going to be an interesting playoff series. You've got a 3-game series to open up, which I think is an improvement over the 1-game wild card, to be very honest, because I don't think that's always a fair representation of the best team getting forward. But honestly, 3 games isn't much better. You've got to win 2 out of 3. We see all the time really good teams losing to really bad teams in 3-game series. So I would expect in the opening rounds of the playoffs, you're going to see not the Yankees necessarily, but a team like the Yankees of that stature just lose 2 out of 3 and then they're gone. And I don't know that baseball and its limited television audience right now can handle the Yankees being eliminated that early, or the Cubs, or the Dodgers, or somebody like that. But somebody big is going to fall in the playoffs in that current format. And then after that, I don't even know how it's going to work other than you're going to be in the bubble. I don't watch a lot of NBA basketball, but I tried to watch a little bit of the Rockets last night. It's just super sterile. And they do their best, and I think basketball is a easier game to get excited about sometimes for some folks, but it's just in such a sterile environment. And if we know anything about Major League Baseball with Rob Manfred behind it, it's going to be sterile because that's how he likes it. Plain and sterile. White bread for everybody.
Missionary. What? Not that there's anything wrong with that. No, you bring up an interesting thing because the other part of home field advantage is knowing if you're playing at Minute Maid how far back off the left field wall to play a ball off the wall. Right. Like those are things that matter, and I completely understand. I mean, I've been saying this should have been bubbled up from the beginning. The minute it was 60 games, it should have been bubbled up. I guess 2 questions then as we go forward. What do you want to see out of the Astros for these last 28 games? Not from a performance, because you want to see them go 28-0. What do you want to see Click and Dusty doing to prime for the playoffs? And second part question, looking at the A's, looking at the Astros, schedule remaining, who do you think – what are the Astros' chances of coming out of this on top of the division?
For the first part, what I want to see is consistency and health. I mean, that's the easiest thing. And we would be saying that in a 162-game season at the 1st of September. We are in a pennant race. I think that our former manager, A.J. Hinch, made a very good point last year that the Astros haven't really played a game that was meaningless since September of 2016. They have been in contention or been in the lead of a division or a playoff game ever since then. And they're still in that spot, even though they're unaccustomed to be trailing by 2.5 games this deep into the season. So they've got something to play for.
Or this early into the season. That's the part of it, though, right?
Right. The fan in me really wants to hope that, as we've seen the last few years, the Astros just go completely atomic on, about 60 games into the season. And we've seen that in 17 and 18 and 19. Well, that would be lined up with the playoffs. That would be great. But that consistency that I need to see is dictated by health. You've got to get Bregman back and healthy. You've got to get Springer fully healthy. Even if, at this point, getting him through the Oakland series and letting him rest a little bit up until then and letting him play just enough to get his timing back, which is something Hinch was really good at. We'll have to see how Baker feels about. If you get Bregman back, if you can get Springer healthy, Altuve's lost all his power. I'm not sure what's happened, but he's starting to get on base at a little bit better clip. And even if that's bunt hits, even if that's infield hits, whatever it takes, him getting on base is a lot more important than him hitting for power. So if you can get the lineup settled with 7 healthy guys and then throw in a Reddick and a Maldonado, you're in pretty good shape. You don't have to depend on the rumor of Aledmus Diaz, because I hear he's on the team. I've never seen him produce, so I'm not sure that he's a real thing. But you hope Tucker can continue to expand in the DH role. You hope you don't miss Yordan Alvarez this year. Tucker's done a pretty good job all things, being equal, of filling in for him. And then you hope that you get a shot in the arm with Verlander coming back, even if that's somehow all he can do is pitch the 8th or 9th inning, which would be an interesting twist for him.
Yeah.
He's still at like 25, 30 pitches and not feeling any pain, but not really advancing much past that. But you've got enough starting pitching to do well. Some days you have a good closer. Some days you have a shaky closer. We've seen that in the first 2 games of this current Rangers series. So you've got the pieces that if you could just get hot and get healthy, I think you could make a pretty deep run. But this playoff season is going to be even more of a crapshoot than it usually is. So enjoy the ride, I guess, is the best I can tell you, because nobody knows what's going to happen. And anybody who says they do is lying to you, unless, of course, they're Dodgers fans. Speaking
of before you answer the second question, I will say that Scott McEntire has he brought up earlier in the show that he really thinks this 16 playoff thing is going to be around to stay, that this will be one of those things that Manfred does not get rid of.
Oh, I think this is absolutely in Manfred's wheelhouse. I think in Manfred's perfect world, he would have, 50% or greater of the teams making the playoffs, which means more teams in contention later in the season, which means more fans buying tickets in theory, which means more money in the playoffs in theory from TV. The problem is a little bit of what you saw with the trade deadline. One of the things that makes baseball so much fun and so unique is all the activity around the trade deadline, because you definitely have teams that pack up the tent in a normal year, July 31st, and start selling off good pieces. I think you're going to see that less and less the more playoff teams there are, because more teams, like I said, are in contention. So why am I selling if I could possibly make the playoffs and get hot at the right time and make a run? But yeah, I think that's it. It will not surprise me when we get to the CBA if Manfred's plan is 120 to 140 game season, 16 to 20 teams make the playoffs. First round buys for your, good teams. Some sort of weird running man competition to see who you get to pick to play. I mean, just anything you can think of about how you would break a tie in a high school playoff tournament. That's what Major League Baseball is going to come to if Manfred gets his way unfettered.
I really do hope it's some kind of – I'm trying to think of some of the wacky characters in the running man and who I want the Astros to pick. But let's go back to the schedule real quick as we wrap up. So, of course, Astros Twitter blamed the Oakland A's case as a hoax to avoid the sweep. Mm-hmm. But if they did, they ended up, to your point earlier before we started, actually may have caused themselves a much more complicated situation, because they've got 4 games to make up, I think.
Yes. They've
not the one.
Yeah, they've got 4 or 5, I've lost count, doubleheaders for the remaining of the season, including 3 of those in a 13-day span with no breaks. So the A's are playing
for me.
16 games in 13 days.
Odds. So where do you feel like the odds are going to be Astros winning the division?
Knowing that Springer and Altuve have hit better on the road this year so far, and not by big leaps, but they have.
I say that, but even though this is dropping tomorrow, but I've got one eye on the game, and there's been 3 base hits. Astros lead the Rangers 1-0.
Fantastic. My watch just went off. Thank you, Apple.
There you go.
I think that, you get in, we're either going to be 2.5 or 3 games back by the time this airs. The A's have a really tough schedule coming up with the Padres for 3, the Astros for 5. Regardless of what you may think of the competition, we usually play the A's pretty well, especially late in the year. And they've still got a 3-game home series with the Dodgers a little bit later in September. So they've got, and I think a couple with the Rockies. So they have a arguably harder schedule. It's buoyed a little bit by the fact that they have so many home games left. I think they have now 14 out of their last 27 or 28 games are at home, which we're a little bit behind on that. I think the 5-game series against yes, it is a 5-game series because we're going to play 8 games in Oakland. One of them is a home game, so that doesn't matter. We're going to
wear the home whites.
Yeah, super duper. On the second half of a doubleheader. It's a little bit ludicrous, but the Astros, that 5-game series is going to determine whether or not we win the division or don't win the division. And I don't think I'm understating that by any means. So that's where the rubber kind of meets the road from a standpoint of what does the rest of the season looks like. If they go 2-3 against the A's or worse, I think you're really looking at a team that just does what they have to do to maintain a playoff spot and get healthy. If they win 4 of 5 or 5 of 5 or even 3 of 5, I think you have a team that is going to see that division title in their grasp, that 4th division title in a row. And even though we can tell you on paper it's meaningless, I think for an athlete, for a player, and for an organization, that means something. And so that'd be the focus for the rest of the season.
This just in. News from minor league baseball.
And we do have some breaking news, and I'm not going to go too into minor league contraction right now, but I do want to point everybody to an article on ESPN. I'll link it in the description of this episode that kind of talks pretty openly about what we've been talking about on the show for quite a while now, almost going on a year. And ESPN now lays out what has really been broken down by clues and hints and has really been just pieces of evidence that we've been gathering on the show that really lays out what Major League Baseball has been doing. And surprise, surprise, they've been negotiating in bad faith. They did it with the players when it was about coming back after COVID. I suspect they're going to do it with the players at the end of next season as we really get into the CBA. But the full expectation is that minor league baseball as a front office will go away. And I don't know if it means we lose the logo, or I don't know if it means we lose the MiLB as an organization, the official organization, not what we refer to as not Major League Baseball. But the staff article does a great job of breaking it down that essentially Major League Baseball's goal, which was to create so much disorder while helped by the coronavirus, has created a situation where minor league baseball now is essentially playing musical chairs. They want to make sure they're one of the last 120 teams standing, which means you have some teams leaking to Major League Baseball what minor league baseball was thinking in the negotiation. You have teams undercutting each other to make sure that, again, it's musical chairs and they want to make sure they're the last one standing. So, overall, this is a very Major League Baseball heavy episode, and I don't know how much mileage concern about the minor league baseball situation really gets people, but if we don't like Rob Manfred as the commissioner of just Major League Baseball, how much are we going to like him as the commissioner of all of baseball? Baseball works because it's this weird confederation of different organizations, generally speaking, going in the same direction. If they are put into lockstep with this one baseball plan, I fear it's going to be a very different game that we're watching before it's all said and done.
And now, on to close it out, the right-hander from Houston, Texas, James Christopher.
So that does wrap us up. But before we go, I want to talk about that most important of baseball topics, the movie Red Dawn. I was thinking about the movie Red Dawn. You all remember it. Not the remake where they digitally erased China because we didn't want to upset them. I mean the original one, 1980s. Charlie Sheen, Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey, Leah Thompson, C. Thomas Howell fighting Cubans and Russians using the mascot of the high school football team. That one. Well, there's a scene where Powers Booth, who, Texan, plays an Air Force pilot shot down who ends up helping them organize a little bit of their guerrilla war. And he's talking to all of the teenagers about why the war started. And he said two things. He said, biggest boys on the block. They were bound to fight again, talking about the Russians and the United States. And then he said that it had been so long since the last one that people forgot what it was like. And that's the part of it that kind of really, in a weird epiphany, really hit me as I woke up. Almost 100 years to the day, Ray Chapman was killed by a spitball. He was killed playing the game of baseball, not football, baseball. And I was thinking about the hits by pitch this year, and everything seems more amped. And let's be honest, part of me thinks it's amped because everything else is stressing us out, stressing the ball players out. So everything just feels like magnified, and now something happens and it pushes you a little bit over the edge. But if we're being honest, there were people cheering just knowing that the Astros would be the ones hit by the most pitches this year. And I think they're something like 14th. They're like in middle of the ground. But one of the things that this topic has really done has really brought up, I think, my least favorite human trait, and that's like hypocrisy. And I want maybe hypocrisy is too strong a word. Let's go with intellectual dishonesty. So take the 100 years ago, Ray Chapman. That's an era of baseball where Ty Cobb used to sharpen his spikes, right? Let's go to a more kinder, gentler baseball. One of my dad's favorite players when he was a younger man was Dickie Thon. And Dickie, I don't think I ever saw play in his prime, because sometime in the early 80s, when I was like 3 or 4, he was hit in the head with a pitch. And so he never came back the same. I believe he had vision problems. He was just never the same player. And I think about Joe Kelly and Aroldis Chapman and the very different reactions that people have had to that, to them throwing at people, and how it really, again, intellectual dishonesty goes right out the window. So Joe Kelly throws behind Alex Bregman, and the initial reaction from, let's be honest, him, Dodgers fans, social media, is this is me standing up for my boys, indicating that he thought it was intentional. I don't think it was. I saw the video where he threw it, couldn't even hit the net at his house. And at least, and if that was, either that was the most expensive TikTok ever and would have driven my wife nuts, I don't think it was intentional. But they sure acted like they did until it was time to hand down a suspension. And it was like, oh, no, it slipped. But yet the internet wanted Bregman hit in the head with a fastball. Except for Trevor Bauer, even though Trevor Bauer then protested Joe Kelly getting suspended. It's like hypocrisy. The Aroldis Chapman incident, again, I don't think was intentional. And I don't think it made sense in the time of the game to do that. I think, and I was talking with our buddies at Before the Pitch, Scotty, we were talking about why I didn't think it was an intentional hit by or throwing at the batter. And the thing is, when we go back to the buzzer thing with Altuve, Harold Reynolds broke it down on MLB Network about why about that at-bat. Chapman couldn't control his fastball then. That's why Altuve was hunting a slider. And if you watch Altuve's career, he swings out of the zone literally all the time. Chapman's always had issues with his fastball control. There was no intent, I don't think. And I could be wrong. I don't know the guy. I know that he's had some issues in the past. I try not to, again, let those factor into what I think about baseball players or whatever, but I understand that those were a thing. But I think my overall point of this is whether they are intentional or not. As people, as a country, we got to move past the fact that we're hoping for people to get hit in the head for relatively minor offenses. And my hope is, I guess, is if something does happen and somebody gets dangerously hurt, that the people who did wish for that realize like what an utter mistake they made and what a real terrible human being it makes them to kind of cheer for that behavior. Because I don't think it's funny. I don't think that seeing somebody potentially be killed or debilitated is, I just don't think it's 2020 doesn't need that. And, I hate the term toxic masculinity because these days anything that's masculine is interpreted by some people as being toxic. masculinity in and of itself isn't bad, and not all expressions of masculinity are toxic. I'm not a hunter, but if I did, me going out and hunting with my friends isn't necessarily toxic masculinity. But being a keyboard warrior, as Emily said on our show earlier, having bigger balls because you're behind a keyboard, that might be a drop for the show later on though. But having those behaviors and wanting to potentially see somebody incapacitated, career ruined, possibly life taken because you're angry about something, it's sad, and I honestly hope you move past it, you know. And you know, I'm not, again, I promised Dawn I'm not rehashing 2017. I have explained everything about how I feel about it, and new listeners, you can go back and find maybe I'll do a max cut of how Jim feels about everything that happened in 17. But you know, there are a lot of realities that we maybe don't want to admit about it, but I think we should be able to come to the agreement that potentially killing someone isn't the best idea. So we will be back next week. We have a really packed episode planned. We're only going to have one episode next week because of the long holiday. Again, dating anniversary. We're going to go spend the weekend at a winery, socially distanced from everyone. But I hope everybody has a great Labor Day weekend. Don't forget your mask. Don't get all crazy because it's a long weekend and you think, well, it's the end of summer and we're going to just blow it off, because that's how we backtrack on this virus. So stay safe, stay sane, try to have a good time, watch some baseball, and let's get to